This is the point where we need to pay especially close attention. You've just sent the student out after they did their oral reading, and you're going to be looking over the Miscue analysis form. The oral reading analysis form that's on the next side. What the student read is over here, and while they were reading, you were making notes about how they read it. If you're wondering what kind of notes you need to make, you can consult page 15. Page 13. There are some recommendations for how you could make note of it. The truth is, it doesn't matter how you notate what kind of reading was done, so long as you're consistent in the way that you categorize it. Okay? So that when you speak to other professionals, to other teachers about a student's reading habits, it's clear what you're talking about. And so that as you continue to assess a student, you have consistent metrics to evaluate them with. Okay? For this portion, you'll notice that every error that you record on a reading line can be categorized as a mispronunciation, substitution, insertion, teacher-assisted, or an omission. Okay? Each one of those is described in detail here on page 13. Here on page 13, you'll notice the difference between a mispronunciation and a substitution. A mispronunciation is when a student says a word, mispronounces a word by saying something that isn't a word. Like the example they use, dag instead of dog. Dag is not a word, therefore they've mispronounced dog. However, with a substitution, they actually place another real word where another word should be. Where a sentence says the tree was, or where the student reads the tree was very high, the sentence actually said the cloud. So they've put one word in place of another, and therefore you now see the difference between a mispronunciation and a substitution. And each of the different types of miscues is described in depth, beginning on page 13. As you look at the student's reading, you'll categorize what they've done as these different forms of miscue. Okay? It's important to note that in addition to these, there's one more column for these, and it's called the self-correction. If a student makes any one of these errors, mark it. If they corrected it, if they went back and fixed it after making the miscue, you also need to mark that they corrected that. And you'll find a total for each column, and that's going to be important whenever you come to the last phase of the reading passages, which is this miscue analysis, where you gather all of the data from one level. Okay? So, to recap this portion, the student read this aloud, and while they read, you kept a running record. You were marking with your pencil on your copy of this page. You were marking with a pen or a pencil the miscues that they made. Now, if you have never done this before, and I'm guessing most of you haven't, you're going to want to practice it, or better, you're going to want to record this. Use your phone, turn on the voice recorder, and when the student reads out loud, you have a recording of it in addition to marking it as they read. That way you know exactly what was said instead of trying to remember it all. Okay? That's a very good tip. Okay? Now there's a second way that we categorize all of these things that's described. We're not actually going to use this last part of the page. That is something that in the full administration of this you would use, but in our administration we will not use this second form of categorization. Okay? So you'll worry about listening to them read, recording it as they do that. While they read, you're marking over here. After they leave to get a drink, go to the bathroom, whatever, you're going to categorize those different errors. Okay? And the last stage in the reading passages portion is right here, the miscue analysis. Okay? You'll notice on the miscue analysis, it begins with fundamental behaviors observed. And what that indicates is that while they were doing their silent reading, you remember when you passed the book to them and they read the reading passage, you were supposed to be watching just for a little bit to see if they were doing any of these things, to see if they were reading from left to right. That's a basic reading function, right? To see if they were doing one-to-one matching. Were they moving their finger along as it happened? To see if they were doing any of these things, searching for clues or cross-checking as they read. Okay? While they were reading out loud, were they doing any of these things? And if you're unsure of this, That's why I pointed out that our administration directions are on page 11 and following. If you're unsure of what any of these things are, go back to the directions, which begin on page 11, and look more closely. Every single step of this is described in great detail, from the fundamental behaviors observed all the way to examples of the miscues and things of that nature. Okay? One of the most important parts of this is right down here at the bottom. Okay? In the silent reading comprehension, it says 0 to 1 questions missed. That means this was an easy passage. 2 questions missed. This was an adequate passage. 3 or more questions missed, and this passage was too hard. And that's all on the silent reading part. And those questions are the ones that the student answered from their retelling, or that you had to ask specifically. The other side of this is about their oral reading accuracy. Okay? If they had 0 or 1 errors, then this was an easy passage. If they had 2 to 5 errors, then this was an adequate passage. And if they had 6 or more errors, then this was too hard. In the administration of this assessment, if either column gets marked as too hard, it doesn't have to be both. If the silent reading or the oral reading is marked too hard, then you will not continue this assessment. You will stop then the student will not continue in this assessment in doing any reading on their own. You will cease passing the student any passages, and you'll continue to the last portion, which is the listening comprehension. You only proceed to listening comprehension when the passage has been identified as too hard for the student. If the passage is not marked too hard, if it's marked as easy or adequate on both sides, then you'll continue to the next level. We were just on level 5, and so you would continue to level 6, and you would pass the student the level 6 Form A passage, and you, the assessor, would continue on to the level 6 Form A, checklist, the level 6 Form A examiner's protocols. Okay? At which point you would read the prompt again to the student, and following that, you would have them read out loud after the you would have them retell, and then you would have them read out loud for you. You would dismiss them to get another drink of water, go to the bathroom, get you a Coke or something like that, and you would categorize their miscues. After you categorize their miscues, you'll come back to this page and you'll identify their reading behaviors, and then come down here and determine whether or not the passage was easy, adequate, or too hard. Okay? This continues on until you have gathered enough data. According to the assessment itself, you would continue until you reached too hard. For our purposes, I'm only asking you to administer the silent and oral reading 2 times for your students. So if you started on level 5 and you administered the silent reading and then the oral reading for that same passage, you would continue to the next level if that first one wasn't too hard, and you would do the silent reading, have them retell, do the oral reading again, and then you could stop having the student read and you could proceed to the listening comprehension. I want you to have administered the silent and oral reading at least twice, and the listening comprehension at least 1 time for our purposes. Okay? This is not a full administration of the Flynt-Cooter reading inventory for the classroom, but these are the most valuable portions of it. And an analysis of the oral reading, and also an analysis of a retelling and silent reading comprehension. Those are the most valuable things that we gain from this in terms of what do we know about our students as readers. Okay?